Hello, everybody, and welcome to the post-match podcast here live at Old Trafford. I'm Theo Squires, and joining me is Matt Addison. Sad news here: Liverpool have suffered a last-minute 4-3 defeat to Manchester United in extra time. It's ultimately a game too far for them after that crippling injury crisis. They huffed and they puffed. They created chances, but it just wasn't their day. And United pounced on the counter-attack right at the death to steal victory and get their place in the semi-finals. What are your thoughts on the game? It is a disappointing defeat for Liverpool.
Yeah, I think they'll reflect on it in a couple of ways, really. I think ultimately they weren't clinical enough when they had opportunities, and probably they let Manchester United have too much space. There were times, really, weren't there, in the midfield where it was basically non-existent. There was just far too much space to run into, and Liverpool didn't quite manage to control things in the way that we know that they can. They didn't manage to sort of keep Manchester United penned in. There was too many counter-attacks, there was too many opportunities, and it's ultimately just a game that has come down to United have scored 4 times in that manner, and Liverpool could only manage 3. And I think it's hard to be too critical because of what they've done and what they've achieved this season. And this is a game which can always be very, very difficult. But I think Liverpool will reflect on it with a little bit of, a what if, a little bit of regret, because there was 2, 3, 4 really golden opportunities, really, where if they'd have just played the right pass. I'm being harsh to pick on Cody Gakpo. I didn't think he had a great game, but there was one where I think Liverpool had 4 or maybe even 5 on 2 at this side of the ground. And if they just play 1 or 2 passes a little bit different, then it goes, 3-1 instead of 2-2, or, whatever the score was at the time. It just could have been so easily very, very different for Liverpool. But they didn't obviously take those chances, and obviously Manchester United at the other end did. And the manner in which it happens, the lateness, the goal coming right at the death, I think is particularly painful for Liverpool. But ultimately, they've only got themselves to blame, because it could have been quite very different.
And you look at the draw and it upsets you that little bit more, doesn't it? It would have been Coventry City in the FA Cup semi-finals, but that's not happening. Obviously, United march on. That means we now know what Jurgen Klopp's last game will be if Liverpool go all the way in the Europa League. There is no FA Cup final to look forward to. It's a strange one to reflect on, because Liverpool didn't really play well for the majority of the game. They started slowly once again. They get 2 goals in quick succession just before the break, and then they look in control. But then those tired legs creep in. You can tell they've had players coming back from injury and they're suffering from the injuries, and they're looking tired. When Salah's one of your players to not even make extra time. The bodies were just, there wasn't that cohesion there in the midfield. Like, people look at this team today, and it was a very strong side, and think, well, if it's so tired, why did he go so strong against Sparta Prague in midweek? Obviously, Jurgen Klopp thought there's enough in that team to get the job done today. And when they have had to overcome so many hurdles, this is the end of 3.5 months, or 2.5 months, intense football, 2-3 times a week, game after game. It's not a surprise to see them fall short in this sort of situation against Manchester United, where it's this intense atmosphere against the bitter rivals in such a manner right at the depth.
Yeah, but I mean, having said all of that, 1 or 2 moments and it would have been completely different. And we've been sat here saying Liverpool are into the semi-finals and they've, overcome challenges, and it's fine margins, isn't it? I think that there's definitely things that you can be critical of Liverpool of. Maybe it is just a game too far in terms of the injuries and the fatigue, and maybe if they weren't quite so tired and we weren't quite so far into the season with the way that it's panned out, maybe the right decision might have been made on 1 or 2 of those occasions. But I think that the slow start was an interesting point as well. I think it's important that we mention that, because that allowed Manchester United to get up. It allowed the crowd to get up. Liverpool did ultimately quieten them for a period when they came back into it. But it just felt like Manchester United were playing well, and they'll come away thinking that they've performed really well, and they've beaten Liverpool and they're back on the right track, and this is another sign that they're going in the right direction. But I think for Liverpool it was more a case of they didn't play particularly well, and they could still easily have come away with their place in the next round rather than United. So it's a really hard one, I think, to assess in terms of where the 2 teams are at, and what Liverpool will look at in terms of what they could have done differently. But other than being a little bit sharper in the final third, it really wasn't a great deal. Other than that, there wasn't a great deal else that they could have improved upon. It generally wasn't a brilliant performance. It wasn't scintillating, but it was still, I think, enough that on another day they could quite easily have come away and won that. And there were some good performances. I thought Kelleher did really well. There wasn't a great deal that he could do. I think McAllister started slow, but generally, got better. Obviously scores the goal, but I think, performed pretty well across the course of it as well. There's things that they can take from it, but it just, I think, will always come back to if they could have just gone a couple of goals ahead. And listen, maybe Manchester United will say the same thing. They went 1-0 up and could have maybe gone 2 up and had a couple of opportunities themselves. But I think across the course of the 120 minutes as it was, I think Liverpool will be very disappointed not to have done a little bit more.
If we look at the goals as well, it's poor defending at times that's let Liverpool down. Like the first one, Kelleher makes a good save at the near post, but I'm not sure about you. From my angle, it looks like it's going in anyway before McTominay pounces and puts it in over the line. Obviously, they get a couple of goals in quick succession before the break. McAllister with a deflected finish, and then Salah, I think Gomez wins possession, doesn't he, on the right-hand side, crosses, Diaz picks out Nunes, Onana makes an iffy save, and Salah's there to get the rebound. United come back, equalise again. You go into extra time. That was right at the end of it, wasn't it? 90 minutes when they got that second equaliser. But then in extra time, Harvey Elliott with another deflective effort puts Liverpool ahead. And Rashford gets an equaliser. And then on the counter-attack, Ahmad winning it right at the death there on basically a 2-on-1 counter-attack. And you look at those decisive goals. It's a poor pass from Nunes that leads to United's third, their equaliser then. And the fourth, it comes from a Liverpool corner. They're just not able to keep hold of possession. It's Bradley left on his own at the back. Like, there's moments in this game where you think, he should do better there. There's got to be something better done defensively. But then you look at the missed chances. Elliott's hit the post as well. And United perspective will say Rashford's missed 2 sitters. I suppose it's what the FA Cup's all about, isn't it? This end-to-end roller coaster, extra time, 7-goal thriller. You're not going to come out on top of them every single time. It's just one of those days for Liverpool.
I think that's exactly why Liverpool had to be a little bit more controlled. I mean, the one that you mentioned there with Conor Bradley right at the end is on his own against 2 players. I think it's Harvey Elliott that loses it and allows that counter to happen. But I mean, that's just really, really silly from Liverpool at that point in the game to be set up where you've basically allowed Manchester United to score. There's no way that those 2 players against Conor Bradley, there's no other way that that's going to end up other than a clear chance. And then you're just relying on what happened in the first half with Marcus Rashford missing a big chance or whatever it might be. I think you've got to play the percentages sometimes, and if it's 3 each and it's heading to penalties, I think Liverpool at that point should have just been a little bit more pragmatic and a little bit more sensible. And I think that's another disappointment really from this game is that there were times in the match where the midfield was wide open and they should have been more controlled. They should have been able to be more dominant, as we've seen them for the majority of this season. They don't normally leave those big gaps. I'm reluctant to say it was just Wataru Endo. There was, Dominic Szoboszlai in there, who I didn't think had an amazing game. I thought he was all right, but nothing more than that. There was just too many gaps really in that midfield. But then, the one at the end, that's not a gap in midfield. That's just, a completely naive way of setting up really almost in terms of Liverpool having a corner and doing that. I don't think I've ever seen them get countered in that way before. We've seen them do it to other teams plenty of times, but it just felt to me like they wouldn't have had to have done that much different today to come out on top. So, but you can spin that as a positive in some ways, in that, Manchester United have played well, Liverpool have played poorly, and they've only just been beaten. But I think that's the disappointment, really. Just 1 or 2 things that have gone slightly differently, gone their way, and some of those are luck, and some of those things are their own doing. It could have been completely different, and we would have been talking about this match in a completely different way. But I think that's the frustration for me, is that you look at some of those goals, and yes, Manchester United gave away some silly chances. They ended the match with Bruno Fernandes and Antony as 2 of their back 4. I mean, they were there to be got at, and Liverpool just didn't quite manage to do that for whatever reason, whether it's tiredness, whether it was just an off day, whether it was a little bit of luck or whatever it might be. I think they will go away thinking they should have done a lot better there. And it probably doesn't help, of course. It's now the international break where they've got a couple of weeks to kind of sit on that and stew and think over it.
I'd say it's a good time for the international break, though. Like we saw at the press conference on Friday, Klopp saying that he hopes to have Curtis Jones back after the international break against Brighton. Then you've got Trent and, was it Jota, the next 2? And that'll be Sheffield United at home, or the next game at Old Trafford on April the 7th, I think it is. And then beyond that, you've got Actually, I don't think it was Jota, was it? There's a few players anyway coming back. It was Jota. It just seems like he should be further away in his recovery because it was quite a nasty ankle injury. But then Bajcetic as well. We saw Gravenberch on the bench. Like Liverpool have got players coming back now, so to get those 2 extra weeks on the training ground where no games, they can recover a bit before they go into this final straight. Not going to be an FA Cup trophy for them this year, but they can still win a treble. Europa League still there, Premier League still there. I reckon we should have a word on the fans here. Like Liverpool fans, I thought they were great throughout. Obviously, they'd have been happier to be celebrating wildly at the end, but there are some really great moments from them, like when there was the Virgil van Dijk singing when they're in the warm-up, and then right at the end, once this stadium's emptied and they're being held back, when they're singing Three Little Birds, You'll Never Walk Alone, So Glad Jurgen is a Red. But they didn't let themselves down either, because we've heard some pretty vile chants from the rest of the stadium today, with tragedy chanting, poverty chanting. Liverpool fans can depart with their heads held up high and knowing that there's still plenty more there to be won for Liverpool this season.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, there's a lot to sort of unpack from the game and the way that it unfolded. But, in terms of the two sets of supporters, I think you've put it perfectly there. Liverpool were exemplary. They were kept behind at the end and had a couple of renditions of various songs singing about Jurgen Klopp. You can tell that the mood in the away end has obviously been dampened to some extent, but there's still plenty more to play for. It was fairly obvious, as we discussed before, that the direction of travel for Liverpool and United is slightly different at the moment. There was one team that played below par and just about managed to not win that game, and the other one had to play really well in order to go through. So I think everyone can see that, and obviously some of the stuff that we heard from the home end as well is something that I've written about post-match. It's the exact kind of thing that you don't really want to have to talk about when you come to these games. It's not the majority of people in the stadium, but it was certainly a big enough minority to make it audible and clear. And it wasn't just a one-off. It was multiple occasions through the match. Before the match, we heard things during the match, and for a Manchester United team that has just beaten Liverpool, for the fans to be singing about that rather than the players on the pitch who've just given them what will have been probably the moment of their season. Whatever happens in the semi-final or potential final or the rest of this season in terms of trying to get into the Champions League, this was a big moment for them. And unfortunately, a large minority of them have decided that they were going to sing unsavoury things rather than trying to focus on what is important to them, which is their football. So, yeah, I think it's only right that we mention it, but I'm loath to give it too much airtime because it just frankly doesn't deserve that to be the case.
Now, I don't want to go, it's only the FA Cup, because let's be honest, there was a semi-final place up for grabs here, another trip to Wembley, and then you're 90 minutes from a final, you're 90 minutes away from winning another trophy and having that sunny day in May as the Jurgen Klopp send-off. But if it's a choice between winning today at Old Trafford or winning April the 7th at Old Trafford, when it's 3 vital points that could be decisive in the title race, it's no contest, is it? This is second to what is to come in 2-3 weeks' time.
Yeah, absolutely. But equally, there's no reason that Liverpool couldn't have won both games. I think the one thing he didn't want today was for Liverpool to come here and win by a number of goals and really embarrass United, because then maybe you'd look at the game in the Premier League in a different light. Obviously, that hasn't happened. Maybe you can put it as, Liverpool now have a bit of a point to prove when they come back here at the end of, the start of the month after this one, isn't it? But I think for Liverpool, they're more than good enough to have won both of those matches. It's a disappointment not to have won this one. It might make it slightly more likely that they can come here in a few weeks, but I think either way, it's hard to look past the day of just being what it is today. They've been knocked out of a competition. There's no more talk of the quadruple. I know that's something that has kind of quietly bubbled away in the background. It felt like Liverpool should be capable of going to each of the finals at the very least, but it will give them, a bit of an advantage. They've got, a game less to play now, or 2 games potentially with a semi and a final. That will make things slightly easier during the run-in, but it would have been nice to have another trip to Wembley, wouldn't it? It would have been, something that this Liverpool group would have savoured. It would have been another step forward for those young players who might have been involved. It would have been something to savour. Instead, it's Manchester United, and hopefully they can channel that and try and get some revenge in a few weeks' time, because Liverpool wouldn't have to do a great deal differently in a few weeks' time to win this match in the Premier League compared to this one. I think that's ultimately what they've got to have in their minds going into that game. This will give Manchester United confidence, but I think from a Liverpool perspective, that sort of assurance going into the next game it shouldn't change. They'll know going home today that they've not played to their best, and if they play anything like their best in a few weeks, they will definitely win and get those vital 3 points, which could lead them to a much bigger thing than the FA Cup.
I don't know about you, but there's no chance the game in the Premier League in a few weeks' time unfolds like this. Like, this was very much a consequence of it being a cup game. The fact that United needs a goal until it's right at the end, so they can send on 2 forwards for the 2 of their defenders. Like, you don't make those ruthless, reckless decisions when it's Premier League points up for grabs. It's not going to be a 7-goal thriller in the Premier League. They're going to play, you'd imagine, more like they did at Anfield, a bit more controlled, look to hit Liverpool on the counter-attack still, but it's not going to be a chance of it ends today. It is 1 point rather than 3. Like, it's very much cup football today. It's an entertaining watch. Disappointed with the result, but yeah, this isn't. I don't think it's a turning point in Manchester United season. They've only been able to win today in the manner they've won because it is that cup climate to it, because Liverpool have had so many injuries, because they've had to go and do another half an hour, which they wouldn't have wanted to do. They would much rather, you'd imagine, lose it in 90 minutes if you know you're going to lose than having to do extra time first. But it's a difficult day for Liverpool. But the fact that this is the first defeat since Arsenal in the Premier League, only 2 defeats this calendar year. We've had many memorable moments across the last few months, many memorable moments this season. There's still plenty to be positive about looking forward, and that's what the message the fans were singing as they left this stadium, wasn't it? Don't worry about a little thing. Every little thing's going to be all right. Well, I think that's all we've got time for today. Jurgen Klopp, I think, has just finished his post-match press conference because I've just seen him come out from the media area. So stick to the Echo website for all the reaction from Jurgen Klopp after this one. We'll have the Blood Red podcast tomorrow as well for further reaction on Liverpool's FA Cup exit. Then it's the international break, but all attention's already turned into Brighton, aren't they, in a couple of weeks' time as Liverpool's title charge resumes. Remember, when Liverpool are in action against Brighton, it's City versus Arsenal right at the top of the Premier League table. Liverpool might be second now, but in a couple of weeks' time when they return to action, they could be back on top. Fingers crossed the season has a happier end than we have here today. Till next time, thank you and good night.